Greetings, I'm here with Cal and Luke. Today we're going to discuss topic.
Well, we don't know really what to talk. I was saying, because of some interactions with Chad the alcoholic recently,
I wish you'd stop calling him names.
Yeah. And just my ongoing desire to denominate this thing that I see as, I mean, depending on how you want to frame it, this is where like I can go off the rails in so many ways, the problem or not the problem, because it's kind of that whole thing that we often also talk about, that, you know, you don't need to try to fix things, and like the way things are is the way things are, and they're necessary, but yet that doesn't mean, I guess the way that I would cage it is that it doesn't mean that in kind of that Peter Rollinsy way that I was, a clip that I shared yesterday, I really do believe, I mean, I'm on board with him that I think it's related to agape, but the meaningful conflict, and you could say conflict or difference or differentiation, there is a way that is the very thing that brings about the becoming and the revelation of the future and where we're supposed to be. Like one of the things Rollins is off, he elaborated that really well, and I'd like to put it in the show notes wherever that last Rollins thing, 'cause I think that thing was so good. I don't know if you guys watched any of it. I shared a few clips from it, but I feel like Rollins is just getting more and more articulate, and maybe it's just that I'm just more and more familiar with Rollins stuff, because that was one of his questions, is just like, how do you explain his broader thought to someone who's never been exposed to it? And he's like, yeah, like if you've been following me since the beginning, it probably makes sense. But he said, if you just shared it with somebody new, it would probably be like, what is this insane person talking about?
No, I think Rollins is I think he was always on fire, and I think he's increasingly on fire. And I also think that the way in which he makes sense is pretty accessible. And I've been I've been tracking with him even more as my own thoughts have taken me to the dialectical nature of just our moment to moment, not only the way reality lays itself out, but the way that we lay ourselves out moment to moment in terms of the values that we let's say instantiate. Talking about, I'm
talking about the value of, what is the value of naming something that is a problem if problems aren't a problem? You know what I mean?
So it, in some sense, the problem always gets solved in the naming, because once you can frame the question, the answer comes immediately, and that is, in some sense, is what reality is already always doing. Because whether or not it makes sense to you, reality keeps unfolding. And there's something recursive in its nature, where what it's doing is essentially stating the problem and allowing the solution to come instantaneously as a result, only for a new sort of unstated tension or problem to thereby be generated, kind of thing. You know, at least in this first approximation, where it is characterized as an almost libidinal pursuit of the lack, always a tension that is never satisfied or resolved.
Yeah, so there's a way. I think what he said in that video, tell me if this is related to what you're talking about, but in the denominating it, in the naming it, it allows you and the other, the I and the thou, hopefully in this agapic way, to meaningfully, but yet in communion, name, in the naming, in the proper naming, let's say, you're seeing the same thing. And then that's where it gets to be, that's where you can have meaningful conflict, not where you're talking past each other, not where you're doing the non-talking talking stuff.
Right.
And then like, it's not, and then you can go to the level of, it's not an elimination of difference. At that level, you're not trying to convert the other one into you, or just have this kind of God that who doesn't lack the kind of monistic at one-ment God. You can still have the difference. The goal isn't the elimination of difference, but the goal is meaningful conflict that allows for a mutually edifying becoming.
Yeah, and the substance that I got from that clip that you shared, I watched the beginning and then I saw the clip that you shared. It's almost like by going all the way into the violence and the difference that that resolution is achieved. And see, it reminded me of something that I wrote, which is only tangential to this, but I mean, it's not really hitting the nail on the head, so to speak. I said, God is manifest when you touch all the way to the bottom, when your hands are nailed to the wood, when you put your hand in the womb. You must first accept the enormity of all that has happened.
Right. It's going I mean, that's U-shaped journey, right? It's going all the way down. It's unless you're born of the water and the blood, heaven and earth, you know, I mean, it's merge insemination. It's both of those things. But one of the things I'm leery of, see, like all that, everything I just said is I just listed out little corner platitudes, you know, like I just spit out all these things that are meaningless to no one who's not in these circles. So, and that's always because, so just to make it like, we can maybe talk about what I mean by confessionalism or not and try to name it better. But for the most part, like, I think in our little corner, when we have conversations about that, we're circling a proper denomination of it and we're trying to get at it. But largely when I talk to people about it, like when I've talked to Paul about it, or like the thing that Chad got mad at, like, I think we're completely at all. Like, you're not hearing what I'm trying to say at all. Because if you were trying to hear, I mean, if you were hearing at all what I'm saying, and I'm not saying that I'm naming it right, but like whatever I'm seeing is a problem. Like, it's bad.
The confessionalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And leads to war. It doesn't lead to the proper conflict. Like, that's what I was going to say. Rollins loves to quote this Irish comedian that says, war is an inability to have conflict, which I think is just a great quote, because that really clearly differentiates the difference between a kind of violence that brings about schism and death and total disharmony in a dysfunctional way, and then conflict and suffering that brings about, that's necessary for life, you know?
Yeah, it's attempting to resolve a difference by, instead of allowing the difference to be in tension, instead of allowing the tension, war is attempting to resolve the tension through it, just another means. It's like, all right, we're not going to figure this out this other way, so we're just going to shoot at each other until one side gives up.
Yeah, it's like one side has to stop. It's an elimination.
And so it's like, so we're not going to solve this problem by actually dealing with the problem. We're going to solve it by power instead.
Right. And so something I've been saying recently is that like every value is an identity. Every act of valuation is a self-identification. Every value is an identity. Every false value is a false identity. So like the wrong solution is like the doubling down on a false identity. The identification of oneself with something which is finite in a way that is not truly appropriate to the nature of who you are. And so you've got a situation where two values are at stake, and one seems like death and the other like life. But actually the truth of what lies behind these doors is the opposite. What seems like death is life, and what seems like life is death. And so it's in this kind of agape, this ascent that first requires a descent, that, you know, we are able to kind of choose the like the appropriate kind of conflict, I guess you could say, the appropriate kind of violence, because there is going to be violence either way. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't know if there's a way to get out of conflict altogether. Like, I think that's
It's kind of Rollins' point. Is like you have to accept that,
right.
that it's continually messy. That the nature of God and the infinite itself is violent and messy in this way, that God does not lack the lack. And now that's a hard saying. Who can hear it? And that may be where it's appropriate for kind of Orthodox Christians to at least want to qualify that, or maybe step back from it altogether, the way that David Bentley Hart would. But
doesn't Rollins say though, God, that because he would argue, I think from his vantage point in the dialectical God, the kind of quantum God, is that the monistic God is the God who doesn't lack the lack. And he denies that God. He also denies
that God is like an unrelated relationship. It's not even connected.
Right. So his dialectical God is the God who is not at one with himself.
And that's the Trinity.
Right.
How can a unity be of anything other than distinct qualities? You have this radical oneness, but of what?
Yes, but then that relates to this difference in the conflict that we're trying to talk about, because the desire to eliminate conflict and to eliminate tension is really an allegiance to the God who doesn't lack the lack. It's the at-one-ment God. It's the God without being. Yeah. And it's ironically
it's a false God, and the real God is kind of that at-one-ment, and it is also weirdly lacking the lack, but it's only through the sacrifice of this kind of false at-one-ment. It's very difficult to talk about, because the true at-one-ment and if you will, lacking of the lack and the embodiment of the infinite is achieved through like the proper agapic descent, in a sense, at least, because whenever you're talking about the infinite, there's always some way in which you can say, yeah, in a sense. But there's just the tricky dynamic nature of it, where it's a dynamic alternation, makes it hard to see at every step what you're dealing with and what you're talking about. Is this the true God, or is it a false God? Does this door lead to death, or does it lead to life, kind of thing?
So then really practically, what is the proper way to have conflict? Let's even narrow it. Like, what is the best way in light of, because I think you guys would probably accept some of what Rollins is saying with those different ways of framing God, the monistic God, the dualistic God. And then he differentiates between even the multiplicity God, the multi-unity, with the dialectical God, I think. Like, he would even contrast that, which I don't know exactly what I think about that. But then,
is he saying like God evolves, or is God evolving?
Well, I don't know. That's kind of the question that we always toy with, is this process theism thing. There's some aspect, and I think, I don't know if Bulgakov goes here, but where Nate would talk about, there's some aspect of God. This is the panentheism thing. God as expression, God as, like at some point down the fractal cascade, God in that, as God as a revelation or an expression within creation or within his body or within the church, or something is evolving.
The tricky business of it all is that the infinite as a concept is not infinite, it's finite. But you're always in the situation of having to try to name and limit the infinite, even if it's just the limit of a limitability. So that's the tricky way where it's a dynamic alternation.
Yeah.
Where to point at it is to miss it.
God is that about whom we can never speak, but yet which we never stop speaking.
Yeah, and so
technically, yes. Sorry,
that's
Jess.
that's the transcendent, right?
If you're talking about the you're talking about the cutting edge of the dialectic, right? Because the infinite is known in distinction to the finite, but that infinite is also finite because it's bound and set next to the finite. And what's truly infinite is that unspoken commonality, which allows you to even mentally pair them together. And once you realize that that's what's going on, you pull that infinite out from the bottom, and you make it the new concept of the infinite, which is to finitize it. And then you're kind of, over and over again in that loop. And there's something about the response to being in this loop, which is either one of restlessness or one of peace. And it's about your response to being in this situation of constant dynamical alternation, which is the difference, say, between, I don't know, nirvana and satori, or the libidinal pursuit of the lack. It's somewhere there, I think.
Okay, I want to share something.
Do it.
I'm gonna screen share. Okay. Do you guys see this water wheel thing? Okay, so the water wheel has like these 8 cups on it, and then it's got a constant flow of water, and then you'll see at the bottom of each cup, it actually has a hole. So if it gets any water in it, it will slowly leak out. So you guys know about the Lorenz effect? He was kind of responsible for the butterfly effect theory.
Is this a physics concept?
Yeah.
Lorentz variation, like Lorentz, something is Lorentz invariant.
Yes. So like here's the story. He was looking at a water wheel like this. So you can see that it kind of is moving in one direction. You think it's going to be like go in a constant pattern, but as the buckets sort of are filled at random intervals, the output seems random. But this is where they would different. There's a difference between random and chaotic. Chaotic, like, it's not truly random because it's obeying laws of physics, right? So there's simple laws of physics at play. There's a steady rate of flow. The wheel, is a certain weight. The buckets can hold so much water. They're losing so much water. So the rules are pretty. You can understand them. The rules are simple, but the output is chaotic. And so he was looking at this because it's going like back and forth, and you can't really predict whether it's going to go to the left or to the right, or how long it's going to go to the left or the right. So he was looking at this. Then he decided to plot it on an X, Y, Z axis. And I don't know exactly what the equation was, but here's the variable. When the variable increases, it actually develops this pattern. So like, watch as it gets up to this higher variable. Once it gets to this point, all of a sudden you get this butterfly wing effect. And so what this is actually showing, it's chaotic. It's not random. It's actually following a higher pattern. And this pattern is what they named the butterfly effect after. And the butterfly effect is that, you know, an ant in the Amazon, a butterfly flaps its wings, and then there's a tornado in Missouri, because of the complex nature. You know, if the butterfly didn't flap its wings, it wouldn't have done this little thing that wouldn't have added to this other thing that wouldn't have added to the weather system that would eventually produce a tornado in Missouri. But so chaos is just like simple rules playing out that where the outputs are more complex, are too complex to predict, basically. But they follow they follow a pattern. And so what kind of struck him and why this is such a big deal. This is what Sherry was talking about in the Vox the other day when she was reading from her book. This pattern, like I may not be able to do the variables while looking at this wheel. Like if I look at it long enough, I could probably like start to sense something. And it's an intuitive sense. You'd have to be like, oh, I kind of sense that it's like following some sort of pattern, but the pattern is graspable by this is an intuitive, like if you understand this shape, then you have a sense of what's going to happen. And this is like up a level of abstraction away from the laws of physics. Like we're into a different realm. We're not adding and subtracting the weight of the water and thinking about gravity or whatever. We're into a level up, which is this pattern that's sort of emerging out of the simple rule set. And then let me read something and see if this connects to what we're talking about.
I have about 50 thoughts going. So yeah.
Well, and so in the book that Sherry was reading from that brought this up, I just kind of want to read everything she already read, but I'll just read this one. Well,
that was really good. Yeah, that long string.
Let me read this paragraph. Hence, there is not a rational predictability, but there is a certain degree of intuitive predictability. In 1914, Henry Poincaré argued that logical understanding is not always necessary to intuitively understand some phenomenon and to make predictions based on one's intuitions. It is possible to accurately sense the globality and underlying structure of a phenomenon, for example, the Lorenz attractor, without having any significant logical understanding of the phenomenon.
Preach.
He went a step further, stating that the pursuing logical knowledge about the phenomenon might, once a certain point is reached, be counterproductive.
Myopia. That's
when confronted with the irrational aspect of the phenomenon, the persistence to obtain rational understanding will prevent us from coming to conclusions based on more direct receptiveness. The way in which you experience the wheel as a spectator will strongly depend on the level at which your attention is focused. If you look at each isolated movement or motion sequence separately, the movements are perceived as chaotic and disparate. The wheel system seems like a cacophony of abruptly interrupted back and forth movements. However, if you're able to feel affinity with the wheel and get a sense of the deeper rhythms present in the variety of movements as represented in the figure of the Lorenz attractor, then you experience the timeless creative harmony that is present underneath the variety of superficial movements, and the wheel becomes an appeasing phenomenon. In this respect, the wheel teaches us something that applies to a far broader extent to the human being, society, life, and nature. Just like the wheel, most phenomena in nature are complex and dynamic, and in their complexity are rather unpredictable. But like the wheel, life follows certain principles, and sublime phenomena are hidden beneath its seemingly chaotic surface. And this is perhaps a person's greatest task, to discover the timeless principles of life in and through the complexity of existence. So this I mean, for me, this is why confessionalism and why sort of a rule-based, law-based approach doesn't work, is because
It's focusing on the part of the wheel.
it's focusing on the wrong thing. But
Totally.
here's the thing is like, if you take seriously, let's say, confessionalism, you can actually, as you let's say you try to live as rightly as possible through a confessional framework, you have to be aware of what's happening to you. And so as you work that out in your life, you have to pay attention to what's happening to you. And then you'll run into the higher patterns that are manifest in life. And let me read this one more thing.
You can't double down. That's essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, if you double down, you're actually like just like what it said up above. It says, when confronted, he stated that pursuing logical knowledge about the phenomenon might, once a certain point is reached, be counterproductive. So reducing it again to the logical is actually counterproductive after a certain point. So this gets into this other quote, which he talks about. He said, learning an art is also an excellent example. At first, you learn a logical, coherent set of rules, and after years of practice, you acquire an affinity that transcends these rules. What's more, the rules ultimately become a ballast and have to be thrown overboard. In Japan, there's a proverb that says one must protect the rules of an art only long enough to be able to break them.
Yeah, I love that.
This grandmaster in the school of ninjutsu said the techniques of his martial art must be learned to be ultimately forgotten. Letting go of the techniques after they have been practiced and they have trained and cultivated the body is more difficult than learning them.
And then he said, right, that the forgetting is harder than the learning.
Yep. That's yep. And
that's where I think that's my critique of the confessionalist thing. It's because like I'm not or propositions or whatever. Like I'm not against them in and of themselves. I'm against the spirit that doubles down on them, that won't see this higher mystical order, that isn't willing to forget them to move into the poetic phase, which even within classical education has always been the goal. Yep. You have to let go of the rules. You have to, which is Job stuff.
Yeah. And even in the New Testament, Paul talks to the Corinthians and he says, you're not ready yet for spiritual meat. I have to give you spiritual milk. No. And he's like Corinthians is full of all kinds of rules. Yeah. And then compare that to Ephesians, where the Ephesians, he's telling about the fruits of the spirit, about spiritual warfare, about like all that spirit stuff is the higher order things that the rules are pointing to. And even all of Christianity has this whole thing where like Christ fulfills the law. Right. And so the law is and Christ broke the law. He was harvesting grain on the Sabbath. He was crucified on a tree. Cursed is the one who's crucified on the tree. I can't bring any, I don't know, nothing's coming to mind as other examples, but there's contradictory stuff within Christ.
This is the thing. This is why I talk also though about Mosaic vision, because once you see it, you see it. And if you focus on the pieces, you'll miss it because you can't see it. It's like that quote that was at the end of I saw this tab open on your thing too. It was a great combo. The Lex Friedman Rogan interview.
Oh yeah. I was going to listen to that today.
He closed it out.
Looking at my tabs, Luke.
No, I was listening to you as well. But is that an infringement of privacy?
I was looking at your tabs too,
I'm
Jess.
such a Snoopy
They were like
bastard.
17.
What if I had something unsightly?
Untoward?
Yeah. What if I was breaking the rules, Luke?
Right, I know. I would have judged you and unfriended you.
Oh, good.
But he closed out the podcast with there's a lot of interesting things we could say in that podcast, but it's related to what you're talking about, though, the higher order thing, which, by the way, I always think of, bring me a higher love. Just like, I think everything in like music terms, music lyrics. But But he ended the quote with this quote from, and I put it in the box, but like Miyamoto Musashi.
Mhm.
Once you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything. Which it's that. It's just like once you see the thing behind the thing behind the thing, once you see the matrix behind dualisms, which you can never, which in a sense is everywhere present, and you can never bring down in a simple propositional form because you can't, because then it would be in the differentiation mode.
Mhm.
You can't name that.
Let's zero in on that quotation from Musashi, because that's important, because people are going to say, well, I get it. It's like that, like the illimitable itself represents a limitation. It's a paradox. You can't talk about it. So why bother? I get that confessionalism bad because it assumes that you know the answer to something that is dynamic and intention and not really susceptible to some cut and dried solution that already exists. But I already know that, so we don't need to keep talking about it. And your hesitancy at the beginning of the conversation to, keep talking about something which you've talked about many times before without.
It stresses me out because I know it pisses people off. And then I'm just like, I can't handle the stress anymore.
What I've really learned from just writing my own notes is that whenever you feel like you said it so many times before, but it's still what you feel driven to write, just write it. Because it's actually somehow in the exploration of that essentially infinite theme that what you most need to understand is going to emerge. And to Musashi's point, it's only by setting your mind on the Tao constantly, as it were, despite the fact that the Tao that can be named is yet not the Tao. It's only by doing that you have a hope of sort of like doing non-doing and not knowing but being, and being as opposed to having, at that crucial moment, when you are on the cross, or what is what is most valuable to you is at stake, and or even just every moment, seeing every moment is as important as every other. So yeah, you have to enter into it, even if it kind of sounds platitudinous or boring, perhaps.
Well, I mean, confessionalism is good for some things. It's good for kids. It's good for children.
Yeah,
like that's what, like, rules are good for kids. Rules are good for someone that's learning something.
I used to say that all the time. Do you remember that? Like, tricks are for kids. I used to say that all the time. Like, rules are for kids.
Yeah.
Like,
and so like once you get to a point and you're like, let's say you're trying to figure something out and people keep repeating the rules to you. You're like, this is essentially the book of Job. So this thing happens, this contradiction. And Job, there's something about keeping things that are in tension and not trying to resolve them because you don't like the tension. Because there's a way in which people will use their intuition to dismiss things, and then they get rid of. So like, I kind of think like a lot of new agey stuff is people intuitively getting rid of tension. So they're just like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. This is, there's a sense of, I don't know. Like they'll be in the intuitive world. They'll be like up a level of abstraction, but they won't maintain things in tension. They'll just like, they'll dismiss things because it's interfering with their inner peace, or they're wanting peace.
1,000%.
Like Job, what was that?
I said 1,000%. They won't acknowledge the existence of evil. They'll say it's something that your spirit guide's already planned out. There's no dialectic. There's no tension.
Right. And so like with Job is intuiting something because he actually knows that he's innocent. He has seen the goodness of God in his life. And now he sees the the terribleness of God in his life, and he doesn't know what to do. And so he's like, he maintains that tension, and the friends basically come in with a bunch of rules, trying to resolve the tension, but not actually resolve it. They're trying to resolve it at a level of like, Job has to lie about something at some point in order for the tension to be resolved. And his friends are encouraging him to lie about his own innocence and to disparage his own integrity.
No, I think that's exactly right. You think that's Job's righteousness, is that he just wasn't willing to go. He just wouldn't lie at the final announcement.
And his friends were willing to lie to uphold the rule set, uphold the tradition, and this was
validate the God who doesn't lack the lack.
Right. And so I think this is, I don't know, at least for me, like confessionalism or kind of like having a rule set is good for, for being a child or learning something new, learning to play piano or whatever. But eventually you want to get to the point where you're not thinking about the rules when you're playing the piano. Eventually you don't want to be at the point where you're thinking about all the rules of Christianity to be a Christian. Like at some point you're like, that things make sense on a higher level. And actually, we see this in all kinds of biblical characters. They end up breaking the rules. So David, when he was fleeing Saul, he went by the temple, and the priest gave him the bread from the altar, which he wasn't allowed to eat, but he took it.
Okay. So like, what is the thing? Because I agree with all the points you're making, but again, like even in listing the points, which I think is good to illustrate this kind of higher order thing that we're trying to get people to see or talk about. All of that is good, but then what people will do is they will reinterpret. They will say, well, yeah, David did that, but he did it because of this, and they will put it back within some kind of structure to validate and justify it as like a addendum, which is like why the tax code. What I'm trying to think is like, as you've been talking about all this, there's lots of illustrations that you can use. I like to talk about Michael Polanyi and subsidiary focal integration and learning to play piano or guitar, ride a bike, is you have to forget the subsidiary things that you've integrated bodily so that you can do the higher order thing.
Yep.
In order to play a musical instrument, you have to forget the rules or else you can't sing a song.
Right.
And we'll all see that, or to dance, or like Pete Holmes often talks about this in terms, and it's not crass really, but he'll talk about this in terms of sex. Like if you try to have sex with your spouse or whoever, you licentious bastards. But if you're trying to have sex and you're doing it in a robotic way, like touch her shoulder, now rub her arm, like sex is going to suck, right? You have to forget all the rules and enter into this thing. So like we can name all these examples and people will be like, yes, yes, yes. But then they can still miss, but they won't do this propositionally. Here's the thing: intellectually, confessionally, propositionally, people will not go there. They won't go there. Like they will say yes, riding a bike, and they'll see it. Yes, playing an instrument. Yes, dancing. Yes, these examples you're illustrating. But I guarantee you, there will be people that watch this, or if I try to talk to certain people about this, that won't see the thing that I think we're talking about when it comes to like law and propositions.
Right. Well, so the problem is that you don't want to keep identifying with what you already know, right? And that's the message that you're trying to impart to people who are wedded to confessionalism in some form or other, whether they recognize it or not. And I guess, I don't know, maybe we're already past the point where we need to keep illustrating the problem, but in my own terms, I would put it like this. I said every valuation is a kind of self-identification, and every moment of decision you can choose according to, say, your false self or your true self. Um, and the thing about it is that when I said earlier that you have the infinite and the finite, that finite that you have known in distinction to the concept of finitude is a false infinity. If any infinity that is known in conscious distinction to finite is also finite and is not what it is, but the true infinite lies beneath and is yet unrecognized. And so what I want to say is that true self that you can choose according to in the moment, it's like, it's not known. It's not the self that you think you are.
It's hidden. It's not explicit. It can't be.
It's hidden. It's emergent. It's dialectical. And so I guess the thing is, but people want to know that they have it already figured out, that they have the right system already.
Do
And
you think it ultimately comes back to judgment? I mean, is this why we were always trying to talk about non-judgment so much in the walking on water conversation? Is because if people feel like they let go of this, if they say ultimately the higher unity or the thing that's hidden or the thing that's inexplicit, like if that's the thing that I'm ultimately beholden to, like that's too nebulous, that's too shaky, that's too scary, but that's the whole that's the whole point.
Take him out. Take him out.
Yeah, you're gone, Luke.
Yes.
That was your final warning. But here's the thing.
I just broke the law because it's the poetic.
I mean, essentially, this shape this is the graph of it seen on the y-axis or whatever. This is why they call it the butterfly.
Guys, we proved it to you with graphs and data points, and you still didn't listen to us about abandoning confessionalism.
Why doesn't God just appear? Why doesn't he just show himself?
Here's the thing. You can plot this and you can see this, and essentially you have sort of a probability graph or you have a pattern. Will you be able to say exactly what it's going to do next? No.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have a general shape. This is the thing, that your precision, it's the same problem, I think, also when you're trying to predict where an electron is when it's orbiting in an atom. Like all you have is a probability of where that electron will be. And the people that want to get particular, they'll be like, tell me where the damn electron is, or else it doesn't exist. And you're like, no, we have a probability cloud. That's what we got. And so this is what we have at the higher levels. We have this sort of probability network that has an actual shape to it. This isn't random.
Yeah, it's not arbitrary.
It's not arbitrary. And so, but then someone will say, okay, so this is the water wheel, and it's obeying the law of physics. Tell me exactly how the laws of physics add up to get to this. And you're like, dude, the laws of this is emergent, like it's up in order. Like but people all of a sudden will say, you can't make that leap. You can't say that this is an actual pattern that emerges out of it.
Don't you think that's fear and control?
I don't know. Like it's strange because like people want to, that for me, this would be like saying that, something like, I don't know. Like getting people to, I can't come up with an example right now. I need to come up with one because like, what would be the equivalent between, like, let's say the 10 commandments and then, this higher order pattern or whatever. But to me, even the 10 commandments are like a higher order up from like, so Moses was doing the judging day by day, for everyone. Yeah. And day after day after day after day after day after day after day. And then emerging from that was this rule set, which was the law. So it seems like that's up, but then that whole rule set goes up again, and we actually get, the visions of the prophets. We get the visions of Isaiah and Ezekiel and Elijah, like where is all that coming from? That's coming from, and then Christ fulfills all that. And so,
and then we now sit and wonder, who is Christ and where is he in this dilemma that we face?
Right.
Which and it's we who have to embody Christ as the body. And yeah, it is, if you like, it's recursive, it's going up, it's always seeing itself at the last stage of the problem or the process. And yeah, inescapably, that's where we are.
well, and I think what makes people feel uneasy is because with a rule, you're like, okay, this is what I can do. I have, there's no ambiguity. Whereas with this sort of probability, this sort of probability pattern where you don't necessarily have like an exact location, you have a shape. There's no, you kind of lose a little bit of that certainty, and you have to like
But that's faith, right? That's like even in a relationship, you get into a fight with your wife. Like in order for that conflict to be meaningful conflict, back to what we were saying before, that is mutually edifying, that isn't just conversionism and getting her to like accept your exclusionist religion of the right side of history, right? Like what you see, you're doubling down. You have to enter into a space that's like this butterfly effect. That's, again, it's not arbitrary. Like there's something there. Like there's a pattern. There's a bigger thing, but I don't know exactly where that's going to land. And if you're not willing to enter into the space, the relational space, the communion, that's just like, I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, you're a authoritarian. You're a relational authoritarian. And then like it won't work. And we know that relationally, but yet what confessionalism is to systematically structure your ecclesiology in a way where like that's the mode of being, the mode of having. And it leads to constant endless division. And I'm like, that's a bad idea.
I can read something that I wrote that kind of illustrates this. It was me capturing sort of the dialectic of my own struggles with God and hating God, which is pretty recent, because pretty recently I still was like, maybe just a couple weeks ago I was still cursing God, unlike Job. And I was just going through it, like kind of like what the devil says to Jesus. It's like, just bow down to me and I'll give you earthly control. We'll do it the easy way, so to speak. And I was writing sort of in my pro God mood, the modus ponens, or the affirming mood or something. I'm kind of vacillating back and forth, because in me there's just the part that is God's advocate, but which is almost like the devil's advocate. It's like the accusers of Job, kind of. Anyway, I was writing, like, if he let us just self-actualize in perfect safety and sanitation, it would be evil and degeneracy unending, is what I put. Like, you would be incurvatus in se, you would be caved in on yourself, and you would be small and not who you are. And I said, it already is evil and degenerate. It already is like this evil, this endless evil and degeneracy. What do you want God to do? But now the thing is, like, I kind of switch here and write something kind of not in the pro God voice, but the anti God voice. I don't know. The infinite, in the necessity of its being, is evil either way. You cannot escape it. And being inescapable, it has no true meaning, no alternative or complement. You can't be better off not existing, and bare non-existence cannot exist. Sorry if this sounds like just weird, like schizo ramblings. And actually, I'm not even trying to denigrate persons who have, psychiatric
Oh,
conditions.
you're
So,
out. You've already done
yeah,
it.
I know. I'm out. I'm out. What is destructible is sentenced to death, and you are that on death row. And the you are that, I put in parentheses, my son, in quotes, because recalling a conversation in the Upanishads or Ishopanishads between Udalaka and his son, and he said, you are so infinite and beautiful. It's like you are that which is in common between the gigantic banyan tree and its super tiny seed. Whatever is held in common between those two things, which is nothing, you are that. Um, uh, and But I said it there in a kind of ironic perversion of that sort of beautiful and divinizing blessing. Um, we scream that we do not want to be here, and God says, well, you are here. But then I turn and I say all the same elements could be captured here in the metaphor of surgery, and the only thing that's keeping you in pain and that has to be excised is your satanic insistence on being able to know and predict and control. And more simply, if I could know it, control it, or predict it, then it couldn't be my deliverance. And then I speaking as it were back to myself. I said, my nature cannot do other than to know and control. And so God is culpable in creating me with this nature. And then I comment back, this is the very false self that must die. He is not guilty in assuming the costs of creation, of taking them upon himself. Well, he is not guilty in allowing the suffering to be, if it is the price of creation and of the beauty that he sees in his children. But this nature that must die was the price of your being, and the price. I said the price that is its death. He will, and he will pay that price. He has paid it, and he will pay it again. Just as it says, I have glorified my name. I will glorify it again. And in Corinthians, it says, as in Adam all died, so in Christ all will be made alive. In 2 Corinthians, it says, we all died with Christ. The
elect, you mean?
Of course. But the idea of God having borne it all in his own body, like before like the election of all humankind, in Christ Jesus before the foundation of the world. It's like he has paid the price, and then you're going to pay it. Like when he tells Jesus, he says, I have glorified my name, and I will glorify it again. I think what he means is when he glorifies it again is when I will go to the cross with you, when you're dead, when you die there.
What's lacking in Christ's afflictions.
And it says it says in Corinthians that he wasn't pouring out his wrath on him. He was in Christ Jesus reconciling the world to him. So when Jesus felt himself lose his divine nature, felt himself most, in lack, he was there. It was not seen, it was not appreciated. He couldn't be, but he was there. And so anyway.
Yeah, well, I think that kind of summarizes the tension we face. Like,
yeah, already, but not yet kind of thing. I have
right.
glorified it. I will glorify it again.
We want to resolve it by saying, like, we want to say, like, I don't know. We just want to blame everything in the world on the fall. And, that's all going to pass away. It's all going to burn. And then, I don't know.
We're gonna be delivered, and we won't have to go through the pain of sanctification. When we go to heaven, all the evil in us is going to be waved away with a magic wand. There's no purgatory,
right?
And the purpose of this life is nothing like purgatory. We just have to, I don't know, struggle bus here for an undefined period. But don't worry, when the tribulations come, we will be raptured.
Right.
I think a lot of that too. A lot of that too, I think, is wrapped up in that N.D. Wilson quote that I love so much, that like probabilities or possibilities are the prophets of a mechanical God. So like when people say like this is all a product of the fall, or like I hate it. I really do hate it when people are just like, God didn't have to do this, or it didn't have to be this way. I'm just like, that's such a I mean, it's a very arrogant thing to say. Like, how the hell do you know? And I just fundamentally disagree with that. Like to even say, because it's smuggling in a like an implied judgment. Like when you say the fall wasn't necessary, because this came up at the end of Michael and Nate's last conversation, which was great, and I put a lot of comments in there. But like if again it gets back to the divided God stuff. I think in order for us, it's part of what it means to be a true human being, and for Christ to be made perfect by what he suffered, is that even within God there is a kind of a division, and even in Christ and in Jesus there was a kind of division, and he had to suffer to be made into a true human being. That was part of his creation. And and Father Bear would say he's the first true human being. And so like, and the Bible says this over, so of course we're going to have to suffer. Of course, how could you not suffer? And so like, that's all part of the fall, but there's something I haven't worked out. There's a kind of, so in a sense, divided man is what a human being is, because that's a fractal representation of what God is in his own image, God and Christ and man. But yet there's a kind of division that can be, there needs to be an at-one-ment in the non-at-one-ment. And I think that's the piece that passes understanding.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a joy in your suffering type of a thing.
Right.
Because even though you're just like, this hurts and I don't like it, that is the faith that sees the mystical higher order and is not in their own self-inflicted hell because they're trying to double down and fighting that becoming.
Yeah. I mean, that's why like I kind of like to see things in terms framed as creation rather than as that's the meta narrative that we're in, like creation as a verb. That
Creation rather than salvation is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, in salvation,
What's the difference? That's like when Cal was talking to Jacob and Jacob kept wanting to go back to Genesis. He's like, how is this not just Genesis? And I'm like, it is.
Right.
I think I did try to say that because it's not, he kept saying, if this is so, then it's not distinguished from Judaism. And I said, I'm not sure that if we were to reach the limit of theological accuracy, it would have to be distinguished from Judaism, at least not like, so yes. Absolutely.
Yes, and
yeah,
anyway, sorry.
Anyway, like, but framing salvation in terms of part of a creative act that God is doing, that's in the same pattern of the way he's done every creative act he's done, and the way that this is how anything is made real, how anything comes into being of itself, a part that's separate from the transcendent in a way that it can be named, it can have its own identity, but then unified with the transcendent in love. But if it's framed in terms of creation, it gets out a lot of these problems where, I mean, I don't know. It just seems like it's the bigger pattern at play because well, Luke, you said something earlier and I can't remember what it was. Something that had to do with, because the way God comes at Job at the end of Job, he comes in the whirlwind, first of all, which is interesting because a whirlwind is this pattern that sort of emerges out of the phenomenon of weather, and it sort of takes on its own identity. but it's a
Oh,
chaotic.
I was gonna say the
moving-
whirlwind is like that butterfly.
Yep. Yep. It and Luke, you should do like a pantomime of your theological discourse.
Yeah.
But so God comes in this whirlwind, just this spinning, whipping. There's a certain violence to it. There's a certain sort of harshness to God's speech. But I'm like G.K. Chesterton, on his introduction to the book of Job, writes how like there's just these pure gold. Like Chesterton says, like God sort of lets it slip on accident, that there's actually something to be hoped for, that there's actually something good at play, that there's like beyond the closed door, there's actually light kind of coming through the cracks. And I think that's the tension where, people like to resolve with just saying like, oh, we're all going to heaven or whatever that is.
No,
without having
the deliverance is in the very tension.
Right. And that's what Sherry calls walking on water. The tension.
Michael said in the darkness you would find the uncreated light.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's definitely what I felt when I was most wrestling with God. And that Bible verse kept coming up. Oh man, I love it so much. It's in, is it in Isaiah? Let me try to find it. I wish I could actually remember scripture. I have done it.
That's why we need
NASB.
Jason here.
Does he memorize scripture?
He just
knows everything.
Bible, total Bible dork. I mean, and that's like, that came out as a put down, but that's a total put up.
Well, I mean, like Jason, I am trying to explore his systematic theology and his hermeneutic, which is actually Jason is like Wayne, in the sense that there's someone who's very humble and self-denigrating on the surface, but actually, if you go deep into what they're saying, what they're saying is like something of almost like suprahuman, like transcendent beauty, like that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Nobody would be smart enough to even come up with what when you see what's behind what they're saying, what's driving them. It's hard to put it into words, but
yeah,
I'm trying to find the okay, I know what's going on. I suck so much at even finding.
While you're looking for this, though, I wanted to bring, it's related to this, and also I don't know if you've been reading this, Jess. I know you have it, but because I've started reading Letters of the Tarot because I really want to be in on that justice sermon, and I didn't get in on it. But the Hermit one is good, but there's on this page 217, because the whole Hermit chapter, I think, really is essentially about non-dualism, because it's about these antinomies between realism and idealism, and then realism, nominalism, and then faith empiricism, faith empirical science, these antinomies. And then he says really all these antinomies are they're set up because there's a higher order thing. But on 217 he gets into, and I'm not going to read a lot of it, but I'll try to summarize it a little bit, but it's like what we were talking about. It's the light of the darkness, because he says the gift of black perfection, or the gift of perfect night. So he's like, the arcana of the tarot I must express are spiritual exercises, and the ninth arcanum, the hermit, is one of them. For this reason, the preceding meditations on the three antinomies aim not so much at a solution of the antinomies that will please everyone, but more to encourage a spiritual endeavor oriented towards the solution of these antinomies. You can certainly resolve them in a more profound and satisfying way. It is a matter, in the case of the solutions that I proposed above all of our concrete illustration, which is, I know, far from being the best, of an individual endeavor by way of spiritual exercise. This consists of setting you before a thesis and antithesis, both as clearly as possible, I should say, as crystallized light in such a way that all intellectual light, which is at your disposal, may then be consumed by these two opposing theses. You will then arrive at a state of mind in which all that you know and clearly perceive is put into the thesis and its antithesis, so that they may be like two rays of light, whilst your mind itself is plunged into darkness. You know and see nothing more than the light of these two contrary theses. Beyond them, there remains only darkness. And it is then that one undertakes the essential thing about this exercise, namely, the endeavor to draw light from darkness, i.e., an effort aiming at knowledge which appears to you to be not only unknown, but is also unknowable. And then he gets into like creation and let there be light, and there's more graphs, which obviously prove shit. So, sorry, Cal, what's your verse?
Let's see. I did find it. And it's just so beautiful to me because it's the verse that keeps coming up by chance. Like John, Deep Dark Seas, and I were talking. And
By chance, you say.
Hmm?
By chance, you say. Okay.
Yeah, by chance, right? And because I keep thinking it's not going to happen. My deliverance will not happen. I'm thinking I'm thinking it is a matter of chance. And then we were talking about basically like Lectio Divina or bibliomancy, almost turning to various verses in the Bible, as if, on the assumption that that's the exact word from God that you need to hear. And part of me just can't believe that, that it will always work for you in your time of crisis. And of course, you can't systemize God. You can't make him into some process of divination or something like that. But when we were talking and I turned to the Bible, it was that same verse that keeps coming up unexpectedly for me. And he said, "Listen to me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel. You have been born by me from birth and have been carried from the womb. Even to your old age, I will be the same. And even to your graying years, I will bear you. I have done it, and I will carry you, and I will bear you, and I will deliver you." And that reminds me of where he says, "Father, just glorify your name." I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. I have done it, and I will do it. And that's what he was saying to me in the midst of my just like deepest hatred against God, and at being caught in the thorns and having to be and wanting to wish away my problems and wishing my own unbeing, wishing away that in virtue of which I exist as the person that I am. I want it to wish it away. And that the promise was most clearly there in the suffering. Anyway, still not doing it justice, but there's something to me that's just hauntingly beautiful about that verse and the way that it seems to keep cropping up. I listen to the Bible on audiobook, and sometimes when I'm just going through my day-to-day, I'm not even attentive enough to know that I'm in Isaiah. And then at that moment of doubt, just terrible doubt, I hear that verse come in. By chance. The night I first found the verse on my phone, that was why my phone's Bible was essentially open to that page. When I went over to it to try to almost prove a point to John about how it's just going to be some random verse like Ruth or something, and it was it was that one. Anyway, I'll get it done in nice calligraphy and I'll frame it up like one of those Walmart Bible verses where it's like from like the context is like really like heavy and bloody. It's like choose this. What is, I don't know. Choose this day.
Will serve.
No. They actually say, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." It's like, oh, my house. But it's like before that, it's like choose this day. Who will you serve? It's like super heavy. Yeah.
The blood of the children's children. Yeah, that's cool, Cal. Yeah, I think there's something to as if we don't like like Job's tempted to lie to resolve the tension, and he refuses to resolve the tension. He refuses to lie, and then as Sherry and I are going through this Job series, we're talking about how like things are cropping up in him. Like the last thing we read was he's like what is man? We just die, and then we're no more. And then he says, but a tree has a chance, even if a tree is cut down if its roots, its deep roots, it senses water, a shoot will come up. He's like, and then he has the idea, he's like, maybe I can go down to Sheol and then God will remember me. And so he starts having this idea, and like all this is coming up because he's remained in this tension. Like he wouldn't have those thoughts if he just sort of resolved everything. He's like having thoughts about like a possible resurrection. He's having thoughts about a mediator in heaven that actually will listen to him, because he senses sort of this impenetrability to God at this time where he's like, so I've been reading I just read the beginning part of Jung's chapter Jung's book on Job, which he wrote after Aeon, which is interesting. And then he said like the things he was trying to sort out in Aeon actually led him into some of this stuff on the book of Job, which he had contemplated. He says he's contemplated it for years and years and years and years, and finally got to the point where he could write about it. But he talks about how one thing that struck him, and of course it would to Jung, because everything's conscious, unconscious to Jung, but in sort of like these dual realities of the mind, but that Job would pray to God to save him from God. and so like appeal to, and we even see this like in some stories, like where God says to Moses, I'm going to kill all the Israelites, and Moses is like, well, if you're going to do that, kill me too, far be it from you that you would do this. And then God's like, of course I won't. And then he's like, I'm full of compassion, loving kindness, patience, long suffering.
God is dead. Long live God.
Right. Yeah. And there's this sense where
that false conception of God always giving way to the true, the living God, who's just more loving than you could possibly fathom.
Yeah. And that gets to like the coincidence of opposites thing, that where like you have good and evil, but those are being held together by a higher good. And like, what is that? and
it's very interesting that you say that, Jess, because in I want to say The Doors of the Sea and elsewhere, David Bentley Hart is quite insistent that any God who is beyond good and evil would simply be evil. And that's kind of right, but at the same time, the way that God is, the way that the infinite is, the true good is, it does lie beyond good and evil. But
I think that's why God as creator is really important, because it's at the highest point, God is one that pours himself out towards the being of something else.
And I would say in that dynamic alternation, evil always is what God is not. But the nature of the good and of love and of God is dynamic, inescapably, and it is a moving target. It is a self-resolving paradox. It is a self-transcending kind of yeah.
Well,
process.
I think I don't know. It seems like God uses evil for a higher purpose, and it seems to be it aids in creation. It aids in his ability to pour himself out towards real beings.
So this is what Sherry and I were going back and forth on. It's like the question is, does God use evil as this kind of instrumental good without which he could not accomplish his aims? Or is it more that whatever good comes from evil, he's like, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Whatever good comes from evil is nonetheless just sort of incidental to the primary good that God had had in mind when he allowed evil, which was just the freedom of his creatures to be other than what he is. And the there's something else I was saying, but it doesn't matter. Just
well,
yeah.
It reminds me of the Similarian, that Tolkien's introduction to the Similarian. Do you know about that? It's I forget the names, but
I know the Silmarillion.
Sorry, the Similarian.
No, that's okay.
What did I say?
I'm not. I know the Silmarillion. I don't know the introduction. If you're talking about that in distinction to the actual.
Oh, the Silmarillion? Yeah.
The Silmarillion. It's on the periodic table of the elements.
It's the music of the Estuary or whatever. And
yeah, where God's creating
100%,
this symphony, which is creation, and then like the evil one like comes out of this and then starts adding these discordant notes into it, but as being like the great conductor, he shifts the melody of the universe then to incorporate that, and it creates this dynamic, complex thing that, you know, it's hard to talk about because
you can't actually do anything you can't actually subvert his plans. You can't actually do anything that would not inadvertently further his ends, because the devil like Chad told me this. He said that the devil competes with God, but God doesn't compete with the devil.
Yeah.
I mean, there's ultimately freedom and security. It's just a security that is mystical. Because if not, it's just like there's no escaping. No matter how you want to frame it, like God is whatever ontology you want to, whatever you want to go with, whatever being is, whatever creation is. Why is there something rather than nothing? Whatever is, because what is, and like it's inescapable. I mean, it's kind of like,
well, there's a tension at play, because you don't want to do what those the straw man new age people that we talked about earlier, that they're saying evil doesn't exist, it's just all good. You can't do that, because the evil is actually there's actually real discord, and there's actually real suffering that actually, you know, God says to Satan after Satan destroyed all of Job's his businesses and killed his children and stuff, he's like, you enticed me against him without reason. It's like the reason you gave, Satan, isn't true. This is all happening for no reason at all. And I find that both comforting and, I mean, it's really profound, because even God says there's at the outset, he doesn't say, oh, I have a purpose for this, I'm doing this for a reason. He actually says there's no reason for it.
There it's like you're saying that we have to acknowledge evil, and also that evil, in order for it to be what it is, must be incomprehensible even to God on some level.
Right.
I think there must be a way or a perspective from which that is true.
Well, I think it's got to be true. I mean, in some way, it's well, and it's. I started thinking and saying something, and then I had another thought.
Luke's mind just like a bunch of car accidents.
It's like the same sense in which God doesn't know the future. Or at least not like, I don't know. I'm not going to dwell too long on that.
Well, this drives Jung crazy, because he's like, he says this again and again in one chapter. He's like, why doesn't God consult his omnipotence about any of this? And Jung's like, and then Jung is like, because God's actually unconscious of what he's doing, and he gets into some stuff that I'm just like, I don't know, Jung. You can't just push everything into the unconscious. I think.
Well, I mean, what did Boyd say? Isn't this the whole idea within open theism of the God of the possible? God is omnipotent in that he knows what can be known.
So it's perspectival. So the thing is, looking forward, the matter is yet undecided. You can't say that it is true that either Athens has won the sea battle or it has lost the sea battle, because truly that that future is open, it's undifferentiated, it's neither nor both and but once the thing is settled, there is a determinacy that is imparted to the event, if only like somehow through the act of understanding it in retrospect, it gives it a kind of determinacy where looking the other way, it had to be. And so there's this weird duality that I appreciate in what Luke is saying, where it's like there is one level where things are genuinely undecided, and there is another level where things simply have to be as they are.
Well, I think you can illustrate it right with the butterfly wings. So there's a place where, I mean, you could even think of that as a dualism of good and evil, and there's things that are moving in here. So this like gets into when like when Sherry's been saying, which I completely agree with, that God is neither moral nor immoral. But yet there's some, and it can never be a way that I can fully comprehend, but yet, so like
he is always
the
right
and the left hand of God. So these two wings, you could say like good, bad, light, dark, whatever, but yet they are the wings of a butterfly. That's the unity behind the dualism.
Right.
And so like you can't, that's what I mean when I'm referencing some kind of higher order good and the reality of ontology that just is and is inescapable, which is the love and the goodness of God. But where I've gone in my spiral dynamic of my own personal understanding of this stuff, which has given me compassion for Calvinism and all that kind of stuff, is that there is what I don't still understand. So let me lay it out this way. It's connected to like Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac. It's compassion for Calvinism, and it's like tied into the last book that I read for book club, which is A Clockwork Orange, which is really about all this. In order for there to be real human beings, it's that excerpt that I've read a few times, is like, does God want, because that whole book is framed about like conditioning, of like where you condition people just to do what the state wants, the good. And then it gets down to the question of like, is that really ethical? Does God want goodness just for the sake of goodness, or does he want the choice of goodness?
Yeah.
And the choice of goodness entails me wanting it. But me wanting it, I have to live in some kind of, hard for me to talk about, distinction from the God. There has to be that dividedness for me to even have what would resemble even remotely choice.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something really deep about that I don't know how to talk about. Like East of Eden talks about that. The whole book is about Timshel, or is that the word I say? Timshel? Like he mayest. Like the whole book is about this multi-generational family out in California, but it's about that word and that choice of like, he may. And there's something that's weird about it, because I'm not really, this is where like Paul will call me a determinist but I'm not, I don't think. Like I ultimately, the easiest way for me to describe it is just like read the book of Loris. There is, because in the end of Loris, he says something like he could see at the end of his life as he was looking in the fire, and he looked back and he could see the beginning of his life, and he was just sitting there contemplating, and he realized at the end like there was only really one path. But that doesn't deny the reality of our choice and our becoming, and I don't know how to reconcile that and explain it in a way that's satisfying, and I don't know that you can.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what you either trust that God's doing that or you don't, I think. And even if you don't trust God, he doesn't blame you necessarily. He's like, I know it's hard to understand. It's
Isn't
something
that's kind of the ignorance. That's that quote that I love so much from this book, which I don't know where he's quoting it from, but it's just like, to know all is to forgive all.
Well, yeah, I think this is why this is Sherry and I have talked about this. It's everyone misunderstands God and what he's doing, and he doesn't defend himself. He just lets it play out. He's like, they'll see. They'll see eventually. He has that much faith in you and I that we'll be able to see eventually. And this goes towards everyone and every creature in the horrors that they've been subject to and seen.
And it kind of comes down to God, is that God always recognizes that the evil that befalls, some person is also the condition of that person's existing in the first place. And if it's a choice between allowing that person to exist or bringing that person into existence or not, for the sake of sparing some non-person of some terrible pain, God is always, firm in his decision to pay the price of the existence of that person. And it's always a price that he pays himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he pays it while you pay it. Goodness, I mean, it is kind of like The Shack, where the protagonist is aware that the murderer of his children is somewhere in these woods, and God, as an elderly Native American man, will not disclose the location of this murderer, whom God sees impossibly as a son equally beloved, as the protagonist. And it's more I could say on this, but I'm going to just kind of rein it in a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right on. Because, and there's a way in which, I was saying how, like, in the beginning of Job, there's no reason for what Job suffers. But then the tension, the movement that's happening within Job, the pressure that is on him and what it's doing to him and through him, creates something in the end. He becomes the mediator in the end. And he was a kind of mediator in the beginning, but even more so in the end. Like, it's almost like the world sees him as mediator, or at least the world around him sees him as mediator.
Yeah, don't you think that's it though? Like, that's Peter also. Like, when you've turned, help the brothers, or like you suffered these things that you may help those who suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's it. I mean, I think that is the higher order. But like, I don't know, like this, I think the struggle with the saying, like, there's no reason, is that there is no, again, it's like the butterfly effect. There's no reason that you can trace. It's the search for the why, right? Which is the egoic pursuit, is like, before we step, before we take that step or that leap, or like pursuing the grail, like, before I'm going to go across that chasm, like, I want to see the path. Like, I got to throw the sand on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah. Well, and you end up seeing it's almost like Job. This will probably come out badly, but Job provides the reason for why he went through that. And he's the only one that sort of can, that in the end, Job's satisfied with, after God speaks to him through the whirlwind, which God never provides any answers. He just shows him, like, I kind of like how Zizek talks about it. He's like, you think your life is a mess? Look at the whole universe. It's all a big disaster. like this is, what do you think's going on? Like, creation is, Zizek's kind of crude in that, but I think the point is like creation's ongoing. And you know, when God asks him, like, what do you think is it underneath the foundation? Where do you think the pillars were sunk onto? So like the foundation, you're like, what is the foundation? And God's like saying, no, what is the foundation laid on? You know, the pillars are what hold the building up. And God's like, on what were the pillars sunk?
What a fuzzy nailing jello to the wall postmodernist God is. What are the foundations? No, what are the foundations on?
Well, this is the thing behind
Let's
thing.
move, God.
And, you know, this is where I would just point to Christ. God's just like, Christ is the foundation. You know, Christ laid the foundation for everything. He's the one who is sunk underneath the pillar. This is the sacrifice that God makes in order for everything to be. So there's some great sacrifice that God himself makes so that creation can be. And then everyone misunderstands him and curses him because this is all
well, and don't you think like
terrible or something?
I think this is why within Christianity, the incarnation and then the passion and the resurrection is so central in this kind of weird way that we don't understand because of our, I think, framing of the linear progression of time. But like, that's the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Like the foundation of the world, of all of creation, is Jesus Christ.
Right.
But people are just like, but no, that happened later. It's just like, no, Christ crucified before the foundation of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the whole thing. And they're like, well, that's just like, that's a metaphor, right? You know, or that's just like that's just an idea thing. I don't know. I'm really excited for this Meditations of the Tarot thing because even like there's parts, I think Tomberg, like if you could sit down and have a conversation with him, it's fine. But there are parts I'd even push back because that's something that comes up to me. Like when people talk about an idea that exists in the mind of God, I'm just like, what is that?
Or
like,
whether,
how does that exist? Like there isn't like, this is where I become like a radical incarnation person.
is to be an idea in the mind of God to be any less bodied than anyone else. And that's what I was saying with Adam Lanza. I know I talk about that very macabre topic a lot, but I was saying that you know, one way to see it is like if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? And if this one could do what he did, what makes you think there would be anything left after, you know, some hypothetical process of purgatorial purification? And the other side of it is that, you know, is God an earthly father like Adam Lanza's father, that he could rue the day that his son was born, or is he the father of lights in whom there is no shadow of turning? And it doesn't seem to me that God is able to go back on his love. And if he doesn't, he never ceases to regard Adam Lanza. And if he never ceases to regard him, then that is like his being sustained in being, you know, like in Nicholas of Cusa, the vision of God, where he understands that it is because of the fixity of God's gaze upon him that he has continued being. And so I do wonder that. I wonder whether.
But don't you think too, this is like a Jason almond tree insight. And I love, this is where Jason's really good, is because he just, like, there's something, it's like he's immune to POS theology, because he just like, people will come up with a perspective that's like somewhat negative or seeing the negative side of something. And he'll be like, well, but like, I just see it this way, which is just like the glowing, like universe of abundance side. It's like, wow, that's like a superpower. But even like in the Adam Lanza thing, I think one way you could think about it, because it's really easy to focus on Adam Lanza and like what his dad said and the negative aspects of that and how he exists with like all of that evil. But then like also it's the butterfly effect thing. Like how do you, like, I would say that like all of the people he murdered and all of their families part of their becoming is the forgiveness of Adam Lanza. Like that's not separate from their becoming.
Yeah, that's that very tricky thing where one wants to avoid saying that God purposed this evil in some instrumental way. I would again go more with David Bentley Hart.
Yeah.
And say that this evil is always evil, and on some level incomprehensible even to God. Maybe I would go so far, if I wanted to err on some side, I would err on its being incomprehensible to God himself, in a certain way. But that the evil that, or the good that results from the evil is still, it's incidental to the true good that God had in mind when he allowed that freedom, and it was the freedom necessary to his having created Adam Lanza. And the only way that we could have it be otherwise would be for us to tell God that you should not have created him. Everyone else you can have created, but you can't have created that one. And we'll see whether God backs down on that, whether his love is of a kind that it can, or whether he can conceive of some, is there a creature that God can look upon or imagine and say, better not create that one? Or does he love God is love, and he loves every conceivable being, right?
Well, see, that's where I would go, because again, that's that radical incarnational thing. And God is pure act. For him to conceive of a being is for the being to be.
And I say that in the
theoretical creation.
I mean, and the thing is, you probably couldn't put me in the situation that those families have suffered. So actually, some have forgiven him. They've said that, they're just leagues beyond anything that I'll ever be. You can't have put me in their situation, and then just have me passively acquiesce to whatever I just said a minute ago. I'm not saying that I'm saying it almost as a dare. You just dare God to back down on that one. On that one terrible son, like in the shack, and
right.
See if you will.
Well, it's aspirational, because that's the whole, like, you will know as you are known verse. Like, of course you can't understand it the way they understand it. You haven't walked it. You haven't lived it. You haven't incarnated it. So of course you can't. Like, all of your understanding of it, or everything that you're saying, this is why, like, this is kind of why I insist that propositional knowledge is potential. Like, it's not real. It's not real until it's lived. What is lived is real.
Yeah, that's moving from your head to your heart.
Yeah.
But the real is itself something like it's beyond, what is real is actually somehow beyond the dualism of actual and potential. When you try to get right into the nature of what this is, if you try to pinpoint the moment where change occurs, you can't. And this the change by which you are surrounded is like this ever-present impossibility. You are at a loss to characterize the nature of the reality that you actually inhabit, and it is somehow something beyond the dualism of actual and potential. Although, I mean, ordinary usage, we do say actual to distinguish it from, that which is not.
Do you mean like the ideal and potential, or the actual and potential?
Don't you think that's just eternal? Like, the eternal things are
well, in other words, when we say time is an illusion, we don't actually mean time is an illusion. We mean time understood as as a spatial sequence. That's illusory. This flow that you inhabit, that's not an illusion. But it can only be given in terms of itself. The past and the future are all relativized to this present, which itself does not admit of subdivision or analysis or understanding. And sorry, that sounded like fake deep, and I'm not really like awake enough to, I've been having terrible sleep lately, so I haven't really been doing justice to what I even meant to say. But
that's just because you're just having ongoing 4-hour conversation sequence instead of
Yeah, no, that's deliberate though. That's deliberately me deliberately aiming to overtake David Bentley Hart and become the premier theologian of the English speaking world.
I think we should tag him in this. Wherever we post this, we should. Can you at him? And then he'll watch
should
it.
say some sort of controversial thing to kind of like we want to fight him or something.
Can we do a David Bentley Hart impression? I have a little desire.
We could just quote. I mean, who called him? Who said that he was very like evangelical? Someone in our little corner called him.
Someone called him evangelical.
Something was very evangelical, and that triggered him.
Yeah, what was?
I have little desire to engage with some moronic Philistines.
I do think, I think he's very brilliant, and I like a lot about him. But I will say this is that I think that the way. It's not even that I used to just be kind of anti-political. I'm not even. I've become more political in my thinking recently and cared more about it. But yet
that's wrong.
Thank you. But yet I do think 99.9% of political discussions are smart sixth graders talking about it in a really stupid binary way. That's the opposite of everything that we were talking about earlier on in this thing, where you're trying to find this, where you're trying to enter into a meaningful conflict that's mutually edifying and moves beyond. Rollins actually talks about, he uses a lot of political illustrations in that talk, where he says, like, talks about having meaningful, because he said, like, a Republican or a Democrat, you want to engage the Democrat in a way to see yourself through the eyes of the other, because you can't see yourself in the way that they see you, so that then you can not only meaningfully engage with them, but also grow and evolve yourself. And most discussion isn't that. Like, it's just dumb.
Duncan.
And I think most, like, when David Bentley Hart talks about politics, he's mainly just like I don't know, like lamenting the conservative Republican culture war right or something. And I'm like, okay, yeah, fine, of course, you and everyone else and me too, but like that
Right.
culture war dynamic is not helping anything.
If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight. It's not, he's not wearing a blue pin or a red pin, and that's hard to say to someone who, because I mean, most of my friends are like the opposite of David Bentley Hart. Most of my friends and family, where it's like they spend all their time bewailing the clearly evil excesses of the other side.
Yeah.
And because it is rivalrous. It's zero sum, and you said it very well in one of our previous conversations. You're just talking about the way that Jesus embodied the absolute end to all that, pointless, like talking, this non-being being, this vaporous kind of you know what I'm talking about, I think.
We go back to something.
Yeah, do it.
I think about that Adam Lanza thing that you talk about, where the kid cries out, "I don't want to be here," and he says, "Well, you are here." And I was just pondering it again, and there's something like,
Adam Lanza said.
Adam Lanza said, "Well, you are here."
Well, you are here.
And that, I don't know. I don't know what it is. That to me is like that's the most evil thing that I've ever read. And when he was a 12-year-old, he was asked by a counselor, "What if you could wish for anything? What would you wish for?" And he said, "I wish that whatever was granting the wishes would not exist."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no. And so this is totally metaphysical.
Yeah.
It's 100% a beef with God that you can only express in terms of like just doing the most evil thing you can think of doing.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think like that statement is so chilling. And I don't know if the metaphor will work, but I was thinking of the difference between like a stalker and a lover. And the stalker will say things and do things, so they'll show up at, you know, maybe late at night and knock on the door. If it's a stalker, this is the worst thing that could happen. This is terrible. It's scary. You like, if it's the lover, then it's one of the best things that happens, you know. And you know, how to frame what Adam Lanza says, you know, maybe a kid's going through something, and then, you know, he's like, I don't want to be here, and the mother says, well, you are here, and like tries to draw him into the present and tries to comfort him in the moment. Whereas it's like almost, it's like almost like this brutal inversion of what was, instead of offering comfort, he's the source of the suffering. And same with the lover and the stalker. The stalker will, you know, show up at her workplace with flowers, uninvited, you know. And this is,
And
you know,
just
it's
horror
chilling.
and dread.
It's huh?
And it's just horror and dread.
Right. And just like, and it starts to consume her, and she starts thinking about this guy in the same way that if the lover came and brought flowers, she would be consumed and thinking about him. Like, what this polar opposite of, you know, the stalker and the lover, or the killer and the mother.
Can I riff, or you have other things?
Well, I just want to point out one thing, and there's something too when we're contemplating God and sort of like in our own suffering, or just contemplating the suffering of others in relation to him. There's this way in which we want to portray God as the stalker in all of his. Someone will point out, would be like, well, look at the thing he did. You're like, yeah, that's something a stalker would do. You know, it's the friends trying to flip the situation where God's actually the lover or the mother, and then turning everything that they do that is actually something that's a sign of their love, of their comfort, and then turning it against them to show that they're the killer, they're the stalker, they're the. I just wanted to point that out, because I feel like, you know, when it comes to honestly cry out to God, I won't blame anyone for that. To honestly shake your fist at God and to say, what the hell is going on? Like that, I'm not blaming anyone for that. But to well, there's a difference there that
you can do that in a Job way, and you can do that in a way that's like giving the middle finger to God, which is not what Job did. And I think the difference is in the higher level order, because even, I don't know, this will probably, whatever. I have no platform, cancel me. This will get people mad at me, but like even Christ plays an antichrist. So there's a degree with which God, because I think it's very possible, what you see in here depends a lot upon where you're standing and the kind of person you are. There are many people who will see and experience God as a stalker, and then you know, from, you could argue from the higher level perspective like he's not, but that doesn't change their experience of it. Or even I would go so far as in saying the horrific thing that Adam Lanza said was true.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense.
Well, that's partly why it was so horrific.
Yes.
Because there is something, let us say,
his alignment to it is evil and off and wrong. But what he's saying to that kid is true. Is like, you are here. This is your reality. To be in denial of this.
relentless respect for what is, that is actually sort of God.
Yes.
And just like, I don't know, like Wayne told me in the NDEs, like, God, the demons can't fake. You can't say that these NDEs aren't of God, because demons can't fake that sense of love. And I asked him, what about a drug trip, where what one feels is a tremendous sense of affirmation, and they describe it as this drug is like a lover, and it's absolutely beyond anything that I have ever experienced in terms of, things or people or my relationships. Nothing loves me in a sense like this drug. And so in some sense, can that experience be anything other than the experience of God? And yet, all the conditions, that experience is situated in the exact inverse place that it should be. I don't know. I'm trying to track with you.
You're onto something, because the way that God comes at Job at the end is proof of his intentions. Because he's not, imagine Job ends with God coming down and being like, hey, Job, let me explain what happened. Me and the devil, we had a conversation. This was happening. You passed the test. Good job, buddy. I'm going to reward you, make this up to you. I'm really, kind of just like comes in buddy, tries to make things right. There's a way, what am I trying to say? There's a way because God comes at it in a way that you're like, wait, this is harsh. This is overwhelming. This is too much. Proves he's up to something else than trying to something deeper than just the feeling of love, let's say. Whereas like this drug, it just makes you feel love. God wants the love to be actual. And in order to do that, he's got to like almost do the opposite or something. You know what? I don't know how to describe. I don't know how to like.
I think that's true. Like the reality of love is
sometimes it's harsh.
It's beyond a binary of this feels nice.
Right. And it's
not God is the surgeon wielding the scalpel. And the mode in which he wields the scalpel, the pain of that's associated with the cut is nothing that your mind can fathom. It's always on the cutting edge, if you like, of the dialectic. And what did I say to you, Luke? I said God is making you into something, and it is, but you are not able to guess the game or anticipate the form into which you are being shaped, and that would undercut
the Tim shell that he made, the choice I have in that.
I want to say unanticipated, that the inability to anticipate it is what is experienced as pain, and it's necessary.
Yeah,
it's as necessary as the cut is deep. That's something that's what it's kind of what we're circling around. Mm-hmm. And I hate to use
say it. The inability or the inability to anticipate it, and the pain that is, because it's some subterranean chaotic order. You feel that as pain. But like, and it has to be that way, which is the necessity of the fall, I think, is because you can't, there wouldn't meaningfully be me without that. That's really why I do think suffering is what makes a human being. Like this is the whole problem. I mean, that's my short answer to the problem of pain book, is just like, it's not a problem. It's necessary to humanity. It's necessary to creation. Like it's not it's not an error in the system or the program or whatever.
Yeah, it's what makes you. It's the creative. You can experience pain when going through the process of being made. Yeah. I don't think it always has to be the case. I don't think pain is absolutely necessary.
No, but
it's so common that you might as well say it is. It's just almost universal. And then to do and for the foundational creative act that Christ does, I think it's unavoidable. Like he's holding everything together. And when you hold things in tension, like he's on the cross holding everything in tension so that real being can emerge, that we can actually become real people, that everything, so that rocks can be, and that plants and trees, and that everything can be and have its own particularity, that God isn't controlling it like a robot, or he's not manipulating things. He's actually letting things be. And then that's, for me, that's where evil enters the picture, is because when things can be, things can then choose to act against that force. But then, just like in the Silmarillion, where the discordant elements come up, the master orchestrator is taking those. He's not stopping the orchestra and being like, all right, guys, we're going to start over. We're going to kill the trumpet section. And we're going to, there are parts of the Old Testament that I guess are kind of like that, but anyway, but like he incorporates it into the bigger, more beautiful story that's happening. And we can get a sense of that. We can't necessarily, like, it's trusting him that love is actually real, and that's what he's working towards.
That's a fantastic analogy. I mean, you guys know, I don't want to keep sounding like a broken record, but I do want to keep saying the David Bentley Hart type things, if only because sometimes it almost sounds like this particular gang of people in this corner of the internet, they like Luke, Sherry, Jess. It reminds me of Eddie Murphy in Vampire in Brooklyn, where he pretends to be a preacher, and he sermonizes that evil is good. There's something about that framing which is just wrong. Like right. I said earlier, like in the dynamical alternation, evil always is what God is not. But that analogy is so perfect, because what is also evil is to insist that we stop. It's like stop playing, kick this guy out of the orchestra. And it's like, what are you doing, God, by allowing this madman to continue to play in this offbeat way? God never stops the orchestra.
He's like making you all better. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, he's like, just watch this. Well, and
deal with it. Play better.
Well, and it's the case that God is also patient and merciful and kind. And so, like, if you suffer something, and the tendency for us as rule makers, we're like, no, you have to trust God. You have to believe that he's doing something better through this. You don't have to. That's the whole thing, is God will let you as long as you need to sort through it.
God will let you curse at him and rail at him, and that's right. What Wayne told me to do. He said it said it's better that you be angry at God and curse God. Yep. Well, he didn't say that, but
because the reality is, and that's, you have to be where you're at. You have to be honest, because if you're in denial, that's where you get into unhealthy divided man stuff. Because you can sit there and just be like, well, you shouldn't rail at God. Okay, well, I'll just buckle down and double down and do the gospel.
Well, people do that. People do that all the time, and they're not honest.
Right. And in those experiences, just as in Job, that's where I saw just how faultless and perfect and far away, but still imminently right here that God is. That it was in those moments where I most clearly saw how justified he is. Because in the Doors of the Sea, David Bentley Hart does, you know, he writes a lot about the scene in the Brothers Karamazov where Yvonne puts to Alyosha the story in the tabloids of a baby girl who was tortured to death by her own parents, and he asked Alyosha whether Alyosha would assume the mantle of omnipotence and the ability to construct whatever perfect edifice for humanity that he wished to construct, on the condition that he build it on the foundation of this one baby girl. You can think of like the sacrifices that ancient Near Eastern cultures used to make in terms of children who were laid under the foundations and the posts of buildings. And this is a perfect question for the anti-theist Yvonne to put to Alyosha, because at least from that vantage point, it looks like that is the choice that God has chosen to make, as if he has merely co-opted this girl and used her suffering instrumentally as a condition without which he could not have purchased the good. But he also asks, David Bentley Hart also asks whether it would have been more merciful not to create her at all. And that's essentially what the devil says. He says, what is so terrible, it should never have been.
Right.
And and those who enact that logic imagine themselves justified while they do so. And the truth of the matter is that it can't be, you know, I mean, Mary was asked when the angel Gabriel gave the you know, he made the annunciation to Mary. You can just see that it's just like, you know, a totally positive like development. It's like, yeah, you know, it was all great. Hey, Mary, you're gonna have a baby. Or you can see it as something which was backlit by the knowledge that one day the most terrible thing conceivable was going to befall the most beautiful person you know, that she would ever know. You know, when you have a child, it's like you know, like it says in The Road, it's like if God didn't speak him, then God never spoke, something like that. It's like what I've thought in terms of in connection with Benjamin is the phrase that came to my mind is how this term comes nearer the meaning of the infinite than anything hitherto. It's like I see God most in Benjamin, and I never saw God until I saw him. And so like it's this thing, but it's also the knowledge that she would have to hold his broken body, and yet would it be better if it had never been? It's like I hold it true, whatever befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Because if you love, then you're never in the position of saying that, oh, I wish I had never known this person so I wouldn't have to feel the pain of their absence. But if you don't love, then you will wish that it were gone. Let it just take it away, right? Negate it. And that's I you know, that's if I'm circling it, that's kind of where I land.
Yeah, it's good.
That's it. I felt it. Did you feel it?
But legitimately, many times, yeah, I thought that there was a lot that was, and you always have to get ahead of your head. Just say whatever you think is not the right thing, but no.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, and I want to close with this, or I would say this because it's connected to that, and thinking ahead of your head and true dialogos and not knowing where the conversation is going to go. But
a secret handshake.
One of the parts of the Lex Friedman Rogan conversation is he asked him, or they talked about Trump and if Rogan would ever interview Trump, and Rogan said no, because he said he's been like, they reached out to him a couple times, essentially Trump or the administration or something, and he was just didn't want to do it. And he said part of that is because he said, I'm not a Trump fan or an advocate, and I don't want to, essentially, like he said, I don't want to humanize him to people, because, and he gave the comparison, as he said, he's had Alex Jones, like after Alex Jones was canceled, he had Alex Jones on a few times, and all that did was kind of reinvigorate the Alex Jones stock, because he said over the course of the conversation, you could see, you could essentially see his humanity and realize like he has some neuroses and psychological problems and issues, and he's working through those. But you saw the real humanity of Alex Jones, and it just kind of reinvigorated him a little bit. And he said he just essentially doesn't want to do that to Trump. And Lex, I like Lex a lot, because Lex really pushed back on him, because Lex is leaving to go to like Russia and Ukraine pretty soon.
Oh, wow.
And he may interview Putin, and he may interview some Ukrainian leaders and things as well, and have conversations. I don't know. It's just kind of up in the air. So they talked about that a little bit. And Rogan said something like, I'll interview, and they were just joking about it. I'll maybe interview Trump if you interview Putin, because, and Lex just really pushed back, because he said, isn't that kind of the whole point of this? Because I essentially saw it as like what it was. Like what Rogan's essentially saying is, I don't want to platform Trump. And he's essentially arguing for like deplatforming. Like, I don't want to give him the biggest podcast in the world to increase his popularity. So what he's essentially saying, for as much, I saw it as a slip of, and Rogan is normally very consistent, but I'm just like, you're such a free speech person, and you're such a long form podcast person, that you say this is where people can't really hide. And that's your whole advocacy of the success of your show and what you do. But you don't want to do that with Trump. Well, you're bullshitting yourself then. You don't really believe the things that you say you believe. And I think that's why I say I like to speak in front of my head, is because whatever's in my head, and as much as I'm slowly thinking about it and curating it, although there's a benefit to that if you eventually resubmit it to the ineffable transcendent unity, the thing behind the thing behind the thing, there can be value to that. But when I'm talking, I don't want to, there's a way that I think it's almost like a fundamental mistrust of myself or my own egoic intellect, that I don't want to pre-screen stuff. Like, I just want it to come out, because it's too easy to play into you submit things to the rules, even of your own consciousness, and you'll filter yourself and however psychology works with the conscious and the subconscious, like that's the opposite of psychoanalysis, is which is why I love psychoanalysis so much. You want to get people talking in a place without judgment, so that they say what they really think, rather than saying what they think they're supposed to think. Because those can be different things, And so, I don't know. That's a good podcast too, but I was just like, I want Rogan to interview Trump. He should. And Rollins actually brought up Trump too, because he said he abhors most American politics, because really it's a false choice between the neoliberals and the neoconservatives. And he's like, that's not like a real choice. But he said the last election was actually interesting when you had Bernie and Trump. He said that was actually a legitimate choice. Like, you're actually choosing between like some form of anti-corporatist socialism that is not like a neoliberal thing, and some sort of like capitalist corporate nationalism, popularism that you had in Trump, which is like, those are, I mean, if you don't like the guys, that's fine, but at least it's not like the false choice bullshit we normally have. So, and I don't know, Trump or Rogan just doesn't, like, I don't think he sees or acknowledges that point with the whole Trump stuff. Let's end it on politics.
No, where we're gonna end it is we're gonna say that, but without further comment or elaboration.
Okay.
And this is all why you do have to sacrifice Isaac. Boom, done. No answers or comebacks permitted.
All right, so now we got that figured out.